right, so today we're going to try to figure out how to spot a liar.
Yeah.
We're using Pamela Meyer's TED Talk, How to Spot a Liar, for this deep dive.
Sounds interesting. It's not really about suspecting everyone you meet, but more about understanding those little signs that someone might not be telling the truth.
Yeah. Okay, so Meyer says right away that lying is actually like a cooperative thing. If you're being lied to, it's because, I guess on some level, you've agreed to be lied to. I mean,
It's a weird thought, right?
I know.
One of the things that really hit me was the sheer cost of all this deception. Meyer says corporate fraud alone, just in the U.S., cost almost $1 trillion last year. $1 trillion. It's just crazy how much money is just poof gone because of lies.
I know. She talked about some really big examples, too, like Enron and Madoff, the mortgage crisis. I mean, huge scandals with massive consequences, right? So what makes people lie on that scale? Like, what could possibly drive someone to do that?
Well, I think it comes down to this gap between who we are and who we want to be. Everybody wants things, success, love, power, all that. And Meyer argues that sometimes lying just seems like the easiest way to get there.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But it still seems like a pretty big leap from, like, wanting something to, pulling off a multi-billion-dollar fraud.
Well, think about it. A lot of these big scandals start with small compromises, little white lies that kind of snowball over time. I think the desire to, maintain a certain image to cover up mistakes, it can just become a slippery slope. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was like one lie leads to another, and then all of a sudden you're in way over your head.
Yeah.
Meyer said that we encounter something like, get this, 10 to 200 lies every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. It's kind of disturbing when you think about it.
It is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, sure, some of them are those little white lies, right? But she also said that strangers lie to each other like 3 times within the first 10 minutes of meeting.
Rare to know. It is crazy. But I think what we have to remember is that, deception is kind of woven into how we interact with each other, It's always been part of our history and our culture, right? Think about literature. Dante, Shakespeare, even the Bible. Deception is everywhere.
So lying's common, it's costly, and it's like deeply rooted in our culture.
Hmm.
But how do we get better at spotting it? That's the big question.
Right. Well, Meyer gives us a few clues to look for. She breaks down both speech patterns and body language. She uses some really interesting examples, too, to explain what she means.
Yeah, like Bill Clinton's denial about Monica Lewinsky. Meyer pointed out how he used really formal language. I did not have sexual relations. It just seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't someone lying try to sound like casual and relaxed so people don't get suspicious?
You'd think so, right? But actually, research shows that liars tend to use more formal language when they're really trying hard to convince you. It's like they're overcompensating, trying to sound extra credible.
Yeah. So they think, if I sound super official, no one will question me. Meyer also mentioned that liars often distance themselves from the subject, like Clinton saying that woman instead of saying Monica Lewinsky's name.
Right, exactly.
Wow.
That distancing language, it's like they're trying to separate themselves emotionally from the lie, almost like they're minimizing their involvement.
So we've got formal language, distancing language, both potential red flags. What about body language? I always thought liars fidget a lot. Is that true?
That's actually a pretty common misconception. What's interesting is that liars are actually more likely to freeze their upper body. When you're telling the truth, you're relaxed and your body language kind of flows naturally. But when you're trying to keep a lie going, you become super aware of your movements. And so you tend to stiffen up.
Huh. So it's not about the fidgeting. It's more about like a sudden lack of movement.
Right.
Interesting. What about eye contact? Is it true that liars avoid eye contact?
That's another myth. A lot of times liars actually make too much eye contact. They're trying to overcompensate for that stereotype, Think about someone staring you down intensely, trying to convince you of something. It's a little unsettling, right?
That's a little too intense. It feels forced and unnatural, like they're trying too hard.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about smiling? I mean, a smile is usually a sign of warmth and honesty.
Yeah, a genuine smile, for sure. But a liar can fake a smile just like anything else. The key is to look at their eyes. A real smile, a genuine smile, reaches the eyes right. It crinkles the corners, gives you those crow's feet, but those tiny wrinkles, they're involuntary muscles, so they're really hard to fake.
So a fake smile might use the mouth, but the eyes aren't really in on it.
Exactly.
Got it. Good. This is all super helpful. It's like I'm learning a whole new way of looking at people.
Yeah.
But how do we know for sure? Like, how do we know if these signs are really indicators of deception or if they're just normal human quirks?
That's a really important question, and Meyer makes a good point about this. None of these signs are foolproof on their own. Like, you can't just assume someone's lying because they used formal language or froze their upper body for a second. The key is to look for a bunch of these behaviors together, like a pattern of suspicious signs.
Not just one smoking gun, but like a whole bunch of little clues.
Right. And when you see those patterns, that's when you shift into what Meyer calls curiosity mode, right?
Right.
It's about asking more questions, probing a little deeper, but, without being confrontational.
Okay, so it's about becoming like a detective,
Exactly.
gathering evidence and trying to piece together the truth.
Exactly.
Got it. Meyer also talks about something called the expression of contempt, like that one-sided smirk, that kind of, I don't know, disdain, like they think they're better than you.
Right.
She basically says, if you see that, run.
Yeah. Because contempt is a very powerful emotion, and a lot of times it means that someone feels morally superior to you. It can be a bad sign. And, to illustrate this, Meyer uses these really powerful video examples to show the difference between a liar and someone who's telling the truth. One is Diane Downs. She shot her own children and then made up a story about a stranger attacking them.
Oh yeah, I remember that video. It's chilling.
It is.
Like she's describing this horrific event, the murder of her children, and her face is totally blank. Her voice is monotone. It's like she's talking about something totally mundane.
It's a classic example of how someone who's lying can detach themselves emotionally from their own story. And then Meyer contrasts that with a video of Erin Runyon. Her daughter was kidnapped and murdered, and in this video, she's confronting the perpetrator in court. And her grief is just, it's raw, it's undeniable. You can hear the pain in her voice. You can see the anguish in her eyes. You can't fake that level of emotion.
The difference between those two mothers is just night and day.
It really is.
It really proves that truth has a power that deception can never match.
Yeah, and it also reminds us that, we're wired to recognize genuine emotion. We might not always be conscious of it, but our brains are constantly picking up on those subtle cues like body language, tone of voice, facial expressions.
Okay, so this is all super fascinating. I feel like I'm learning so much about how to read people. Meyer also talks about the future of lie detection.
Mm-hmm.
Like all these high-tech tools like eye trackers and brain scans and MRIs. It sounds like something out of Star Trek, but I guess it's actually becoming a reality.
It is, it is. But even with all these advances in technology, Meyer really emphasizes that human skills will always be super important. Like, it's not just about the technology, it's about paying attention to the subtle things that people do, reading between the lines and trusting your gut.
So we can't just rely on machines to tell us who's lying and who's telling the truth. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the cost of lying, the motivations behind it, and some of those key indicators to watch out for, like in how people talk and how they move their bodies. But there's another layer to this whole idea of truth and deception that I really want to get into. Like Meyer talks about the difference between truth and honesty, and I think that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, it's a subtle distinction, but it's really important, especially now with social media and how people present themselves online.
Yeah. All right, so let's dive into that in the next part of our deep dive. We'll unpack what Meyer has to say about truth versus honesty and how all of this plays out in our daily lives. Stay tuned.
So, welcome back to our deep dive into, lying, basically.
Okay, so we were talking about how to spot a liar, like all those little signs, body language and speech patterns.
Yeah.
But now things get really interesting. Now we're talking about what Pamela Meyer calls like the difference between truth and honesty.
Right.
And she's saying they're not always the same thing.
Yeah, they're not always the same. And it's a really important difference, especially these days. Like, think about it. Truth, that's like objective. It's the facts, right?
Yeah.
But honesty, that's more about how we choose to present those facts, our own like personal slant on things.
So like someone could be sharing facts like, I don't know, they post all these pictures of their amazing vacation on Instagram, but they're not really being honest about the whole experience.
Exactly.
Like maybe they were fighting with their partner the whole time or they hated the food, but online it's all smiles and sunshine.
Yeah. It's like they're creating a highlight reel. It's technically true, but it's not the whole story. And that kind of like selective truth-telling, that can be just as misleading as an outright lie.
So how does this play into lie spotting? It seems like it makes things even more complicated.
It does. Because now we're not just like looking for blatant lies. Now we're also trying to figure out if someone is like being intentionally misleading, even if what they're saying is technically true.
So it's like we got to level up our lie detecting skills. It's not just about catching someone in a fib anymore.
Right.
We got to be able to figure out like the spin,
Yeah.
and detect all those, like, carefully constructed half-truths.
Exactly.
Ugh, my brain hurts.
I know. It's tough. But Meyer says we need to shift from being like passive consumers of information to becoming active analysts, you know?
So be more skeptical.
Exactly. We need to start asking ourselves, like, what's the context here? What's the agenda? What's not being said?
It's like we all need to become investigators,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to information online.
Right. There's so much out there, and it's really easy to just take everything at face value. But the stakes are high.
Yeah.
Like, if we're not careful, we can be manipulated, we can be misled, and I think we can even eventually end up losing touch with reality. Like, think about misinformation and all that propaganda that spreads online.
Yeah.
A lot of times, that stuff is based on, like, a tiny bit of truth, right? But it's twisted and distorted to fit a particular agenda. You know what I mean?
It's kind of scary.
It is scary. So how do we protect ourselves from being deceived, especially when it's so hard to tell what's true and what's just, some kind of spin?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Meyer says that self-awareness is key, like understanding our own biases, understanding our own motivations and how all that might affect how we see the world. That's a good place to start.
So we need to be honest with ourselves about why we believe certain things, where we get our information,
Yeah.
who we trust.
Exactly. We've all got our own filters.
You do.
So we got to be aware how they shape our view of the world.
Right.
Okay, so self-awareness is step one.
Right.
What else can we do? Like, how do we navigate this whole truth and deception thing? It's a mess out there.
It is a mess. Well, Meyer talks about developing a strong moral compass, like having a clear sense of what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
And being willing to stand up for your values, even when it's hard. It's so easy to get caught up in those gray areas, right? Those situations where you're like, what's the right thing to do? Especially when you could get in trouble for like speaking up or going against the crowd.
It takes courage, right? It takes courage to challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power. But I think those little acts of honesty, that's what creates a culture where truth can actually thrive.
I like that. So it's not just about being a lie detector. It's about being like a truth teller.
Yeah.
Leading by example.
Yeah. Yeah.
And creating that ripple effect of honesty.
Yeah.
But how do we encourage that? How do we get people to talk openly and feel safe to, disagree and challenge each other's ideas?
Well, it starts with creating spaces where people feel heard and respected, even if their views are totally different from ours. It's about being willing to listen, to actually engage with other perspectives, and to consider, just consider the possibility that we might be wrong.
Yeah. It's like humility.
Humility, exactly. And that can be really tough.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays where everyone's stuck in their own echo chambers, surrounded by people who just agree with them all the time,
Right.
But if we want to get closer to the truth, we got to be willing to step outside of our comfort zones.
Yeah.
And engage with people who see things differently.
Like actually listen to them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that saying, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. If you only ever hear one side of the story, you're never going to get the full picture.
You'll never get the whole story.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to what Meyer said, right? Like her call to action, strengthen truth and marginalize falsehood. But how do we actually do that, like in our everyday lives?
That's the big question, right? Like, it's one thing to talk about honesty.
Yeah.
But how do we put it into action?
Well, I think it starts with small things, just being more mindful of what we say and what we do, choosing to be honest even when it's hard, and speaking up when we see something that's wrong, even when it feels kind of risky.
And maybe just being a little less quick to judge other people. Like giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we're all just human,
Yeah.
We're all capable of both truth and deception.
And that, like, creating a more honest world, it starts with us. It starts with each of us deciding to live more authentically and holding ourselves accountable for our choices.
Well said. Thanks.
Yeah.
I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. It's clear that lie spotting, it's not just about catching someone in a lie. It's about critical thinking. It's about trust.
Right.
It's about creating a world where truth matters.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about the psychology of lying. We've talked about why honesty matters in our personal lives, our work lives, all of it. But there's one more thing from Meyer's talk that I think we should talk about, like the role of technology in lie detection.
Oh, yeah. That's right. Like the eye trackers and the brain scans and the
Yeah.
MRIs.
It's like something out of a movie.
It is. But do they actually work? And like, what happens if they do? Like, what are the ethics of using that kind of technology?
Yeah, big questions.
That's a good question.
It seems like we're entering a whole new era of lie detection. But is that good or bad? I don't know.
I don't know either. It's scary and exciting at the same time.
I know, right? Okay, well, I guess that's what we'll be talking about in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Okay, so we've talked about how to spot a liar, right?
Mm.
All those little tells, and then like those blurred lines between truth and honesty.
Yeah.
And now, like, hold on tight because we're going into the future, lie detection technology.
You're right into.
I know, Meyer mentioned this in her talk, things like eye trackers and brain scans and MRIs. It's like straight out of a sci-fi movie.
I know, it's wild, but the thing is, lie detection technology, it's getting better all the time.
So are we talking like Minority Report stuff here?
Not quite, not quite.
Okay.
But there have been some really incredible developments.
So like what kind of technology are we talking about?
Well, there's fMRI, for example. Functional magnetic resonance imaging.
Wait.
It basically measures brain activity by looking at changes in blood flow.
Okay.
And get this, researchers have found that certain areas of the brain, they actually like light up when someone's lying.
Hold on. So you're telling me they can like actually see a lie happening in the brain?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Okay.
But yeah, that's the general idea. The research is still going on.
Right.
And fMRI lie detection, it's not perfect, but it's a big deal.
Wow. Okay. Meyer also mentioned eye trackers. What can those tell us about deception?
Well, eye trackers, they focus on those tiny little eye movements, pupil dilation, blink rate, all that. And studies have shown that those things can change when someone's being deceptive.
So our eyes, they kind of give us away, even if we think we've got a poker face.
Yeah,
Like-
like our bodies, they can't help but reveal how we're really feeling, even when we're trying to keep a secret.
It is amazing how much we give away, even when we're trying so hard to hide it.
I know, right? And that's the idea behind most of this lie detection technology. It's not really about reading minds.
Right.
It's about measuring those involuntary things, the physiological stuff that just happens.
Stuff we can't control.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so this is all like incredibly cool, but also kind of creepy.
I know, right?
Like, what if employers could scan your brain during a job interview? It's a little unsettling.
Yeah, that's a huge question, right? Like the ethical side of all this. Privacy, consent, potential for discrimination. It's a slippery slope.
I mean, it's like something out of like one of those dystopian novels
I know.
where everybody's always under suspicion and you can't even trust your own thoughts.
Yeah, and Meyer, she really stresses that technology, it should never replace human judgment.
Oh, for sure.
We can't just blindly trust a machine to tell us what's true and what's not.
Yeah. We were just talking about this. Like critical thinking, that's more important now than ever. Like we can't just take the results of a brain scan or an eye tracker at face value, right? There's context, a person's state of mind,
Absolutely.
all those other factors that could be influencing their behavior.
Exactly. Technology, it can be an amazing tool, but it has to be used responsibly and ethically. We need like rules, guidelines, safeguards,
Yeah.
to prevent abuse and make sure that people's rights are protected.
Right. So even with all these advances, like the human element, it's still crucial.
It is.
We can't
Well.
just hand over our responsibility for figuring out truth from falsehood to a machine.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Meyer, she leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. She says, in a world where technology can, increasingly detect deception, will we become more truthful or will we just get better at hiding our lies?
Wow. It's like a race then
Yeah, it is.
between technology and like human ingenuity.
Totally.
Are we going to outsmart the machines or are they going to outsmart us? I have no idea.
I don't know either, but the fact that we're even asking these questions, it just shows how important it is to be thinking about all of this now. Like the role of technology,
Yeah.
what it means for us, and making conscious choices about how we want to use it.
So this whole deep dive, it's been amazing, honestly. We've explored so much, like the psychology of lying, why honesty matters, the potential of this lie detection technology, but also like the dark side of it.
For sure.
Yeah. So what's your biggest takeaway from all this? Like what really stood out to you?
For me, it comes back to this idea that truth, it's not a destination, it's a journey, it's a process.
I like that.
Truth is a process.
It's something we're always striving for, both individually and as a society.
Yeah.
And it's never been more important to be like aware, to be critical thinkers, and to just like stand up for honesty in our own lives.
I love that. It's such a good reminder that even though deception is, everywhere,
It is.
we still have a choice. We can choose honesty. We can look for the truth, and we can try to make the world a more truthful place. It's been great talking about this with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too. This was fantastic. And thanks to everyone out there for joining us on this deep dive into the world of lies and truth. Until next time, stay curious and keep those lie detectors tuned.